Hi, I'm Katsuki, a financial planner. If you want to buy a house in Japan, study Japanese housing environment. I will deliver the lowest mortgage interest rate comparison. This month also floating interest rate 10-year fixed refinancing and flat 35. Long-term interests are rising. Generally, when long-term interest rate rise, stock price tend to fall. Since the stock price tend to fall, it is reported in the news. I'm not interested in the impact of the stock price, and I'm worried about the rise in long-term interest rate because the interest rate on flat 35 will rise. This is the 6-month chart of long-term interest rate as of the end of February 2021, linked to the long-term interest rate, which has been low and stable for a long time. The interest rate trend on flat 35 at the same time was almost flat, and there was no movement. Meanwhile, long-term interest rates soared. I'm worried about the impact of the flat 35. But here is a chart for 2 months, which is a little shorter period. Long-term interests are rising, but due to long-term interest rate, the next month flat 35 interest rate will not be decided at this time, but after the middle of previous month. This is the time on this chart. Interest rates have certainly risen compared to the last few months, but not so much. Comparison of the lowest mortgage interest rate announced every month. I usually announce the floating interest rate 10-year fixed refinancing flat 35, but this month I will announce the most important flat 35 fixed 10 years first, and then flat 35 and refinancing. Check interest rate for the last 2 months. Flat 35 in February 2021 was 1.32%. And by the way, the interest rate in January was 1.29%. So the interest rate was rising as of last month. And this month, interest rate is 1.35%. After all, it is rising. The rate of increase is 0.03%. However, I thought that this interest rate of 1.35% would rise a little more in my sense. At the current level of long-term interest rate, it is no wonder that interest rates are around 1.45%. I expected interest rate to rise a little more. Again, the flat 35 interest rate is not determined by the end of the month, but by the middle of the month. The interest rate at this point, the interest rate of flat 35 bond will be announced after the middle of the month, and the interest rate on flat 35 for the next month will be decided in conjunction with the interest rate on flat 35 bond announced last month were up 0.05% from the previous month. So I thought this month's interest rate would rise to 1.35%, but I didn't go that far. Personally, the real estate industry is busy, so I'm happy that interest rates haven't risen significantly. However, it is a pity that it is rising, but please think that there was no help for it, and do your best to repay it. What will happen to flat 35 interest rate in the future? I don't know if it will rise further from here or return to the same interest rate as before. But April is another busy time on the real estate industry. I would like to continue to look at it. 10-year fixed. The 10-year fixed interest rate also easy to think with the long-term interest rate. So if you think about it normally, it should rise. The number one 10-year fixed interest rate is the same. Japan Net Bank 0.499% is the only 0.4% level. Second place is also the same as last month. au Jibun Bank has 0.525% and Sony Bank has 0.55%. By the way, the interest rate of Mitsui Sumitomo Trust Bank, which was in third place with 0.55% along with Sony Bank last month, rose from 0.55% to 0.6%. Risona Bank among the major banks also rise from 0.595% to 0.645%. It is quite natural for the 10-year fixed interest rate to rise as long-term interest rate rise. But the top 3 net banks are still strong. The reason why net bank works so hard is, of course, to retain customers. Floating interest rate. The first place is Japan Net Bank with 0.38%. The second place is au Jibun Bank with 0.41%, and the third place is Sumishin SBI Net Bank with 0.44%, which is the same as last month. The usual top 3 banks, the usual interest rate. Floating interest rates are not linked to long-term interest rate. Therefore, even if long-term interest rate rose, floating interest rate did not change at all. Refinancing. This is the also usual interest rate. The first place is Japan Net Bank at 0.38%. And the second place is au Jibun Bank and Sumishin SBI Net Bank at 0.41%. As usual, Sumishin SBI Net Bank has refinancing interest rate low. Flat 35 interest rate rose due to the rise in long-term interest rate, but there was no movement with floating interest rate, refinancing, and 10-year fixed. What will happen to mortgage rate next month? After all, the most worrisome thing is the interest rate on flat 35.